record. Okay, everyone, welcome to our Living Life Naturally podcast. I'm very excited to have you here with us today. As you know, this is the place to go for all things to help women in midlife and beyond, and in perimenopause and menopause. And along those lines, I have Dr. Cat Brown with me, Dr. Cathleen Brown. She is fondly known as Dr. Cat. And she is an incredible board certified OB/GYN leading the charge at Winona, a company dedicated to revolutionizing women's health. Winona's committed to providing comprehensive support to women suffering from menopausal related symptoms, and their approach includes plant-based hormone replacement therapy, compounding pharmacies, free monthly webinars, and personalized online patient care and support groups. So Dr. Kat's journey in women's health is remarkable, and I'm going to have her explain that to us herself. And she provides much needed support to those of us out there who know that we often don't get enough good, relevant, true information. So her monthly webinars answer questions, address concerns about menopausal symptoms, treatment options, and then she also participates in a quarterly themed webinar that addresses women's issues. She also co-moderates a membership-free support group on Facebook called Winona Women, which boasts an engaged community of over 18,000 members. That's wonderful, Dr. Cat. We're so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So do tell us, well, for number one, where are you joining us from?
Sure, I'm from the Philadelphia suburbs. So I grew up born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then I was in the Army for quite some time. That's actually how I got my medical degree. I came from a family where no one really had gotten a college degree before I went.
Wow.
And my mom had gone to a junior college, and my dad had taken some college courses, but I was the first one to go. And so I used the Army to pay for school. And so when I graduated medical school, then I went on active duty and trained and did my residency in the United States Army out in Hawaii. And I've lived in Texas and North Carolina, but Philadelphia has always been home. And so when I finished my military service, I decided to come back to this area so that I would be back and closer to family and friends. So,
well, thank you so much for your service. I'm a wife of a 22-year vet with the Air Force, so I
oh,
appreciate your service
wow.
so
Thank
much.
you. And thanks to your husband too for his
Yeah,
service. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so what got you into this specific area of
Yeah.
practice?
I was always when I was in medical school, we were being kind of trained and trying to be promoted to go into primary care. But
Yeah.
everywhere I looked, I kept gravitating naturally toward women's health. And I myself had, negative experiences early on with seeing a gynecologist and getting my own health cared for. And so many friends and family had negative experiences that I thought, OBGYN was the best because I felt like I could make a difference, that
Mm.
I could be that doctor that listened and really listened and heard patients and really could make a difference in making the experience a little less painful and a little bit easier. And much of my career, when we train as an OBGYN, so much of our career is focused on the obstetrics and on fertility and preventing fertility and birth control. But as a generation of doctors, many of us, as we started making the transition ourselves into midlife and
Mm.
perimenopause, we were very, very ill-equipped, even, to take care of patients, but also to navigate it ourselves. I think, in our population, so many patients and so many doctors were negatively affected by the Women's Health Initiative study.
Mm.
And there was this general global fear placed on hormone replacement therapy. And so we didn't get the training that we really needed. And
Right.
so it took me going through my own journey and dealing with complications of going into early perimenopause after my own hysterectomy that, I really felt like I needed to start focusing my efforts and really researching more to help myself, because I'm a big proponent of teaching my patients and friends and family that we really need to be the navigators of our own healthcare. You
Right,
know,
I
our
agree.
our medical system is just not designed, and it's not formulated to really, promote wellness and health. It's really to deal with illness and disease. And there's so many things that are so fragmented that we really have to navigate our own health. And so that's what I was really doing when I was approached by the chief medical officer at Winona, basically, which was born, our company was born during COVID when access to care
Ah,
was so bad. And that's one of the really good benefits that we got out of COVID and a pandemic, was that the medical community realized how much value telemedicine could bring, to really making access to care better and getting the patients the care that they needed through the computer safely without the exposure in hospitals and doctors' offices.
right.
So they started on the West Coast, they started in California and then expanded to Texas. And then because I'm located in Pennsylvania, our chief medical officer, Dr. Green, reached out to me asking me if I would like to join the team because they were hoping to expand into Pennsylvania. And so that began my journey to becoming a real menopause practitioner.
Mm.
And it was simultaneously at the same time while I was also trying to navigate and get my own care and really try to go through this process. And so I felt a real kinship with patients because I'm, not only taking care of them, but also I'm going through it too. Like I'm one of them.
You're right. Yeah.
And so that has really been, and then when you get into this space, you realize how much of a gap in knowledge and how much, there's just so much information that women aren't getting and our families aren't talking about. And, there's not as much importance placed on women in midlife and after. It's almost like we lose our value to the medical community once
Yes.
we're done
Yes.
reproducing. And I think it's just been such an important step to really change that tide. And that's really why I've developed this commitment to helping women in this space and in this time in their lives. So, now I'm the medical director at Winona now, and one of the biggest things that we do is really trying to get education out and really trying to do as much as we can to help women everywhere.
Yeah, that's really great because I know you and I were chatting about the fact that there's so much misinformation out there,
Yes.
and having somebody that really has done the research and knows. Tell me a little bit about how we can research better. Is there a way that women can do better research on what to
Yeah.
do? And
I think the biggest thing is to, whenever we're getting online, especially, you have to be very cognizant of what sources you're getting your information from. Nowadays there's so much AI and there's so much information that comes like automatically generated when you do a Google search, but it may actually not be the greatest information. So, there are good resources out there. There's a lot of doctors like me that are sharing information, sharing medical studies, peer-reviewed information. Um, and that's really where you want to try to get your information from a reputable source.
mm,
So a place like Winona, we have a medical journal aspect of our website that's free for patients, and you don't even have to be one of our patients to access the medical information on there.
mm,
And I curate the content on there with a couple of our other doctors just to make sure that what we're putting out and what the patients are getting is real, tangible information. But also, there's organizations like the International Menopause Society and the Menopause Society in North America, the American College of OBGYN. There's good, reputable sites that have good information. I always caution women to just randomly do a Google search, because some of the information out there may not be great.
right.
But I think that one of the most important things I encourage my patients to do is to really look within and learn about their own body, right? So,
Yes.
it's not just about reading online about what is perimenopause, what is menopause, and what to expect, but start really tracking your own body and knowing what it is that's happening physiologically in your own body and knowing when you're having symptoms, when you're not, taking a symptom diary and really getting to know how your body functions its best. And I think that, menopause has such a negative connotation, really,
Yes.
and a lot of women dread it. But if you flip that script and you think about menopause being, make it be a positive pause. Make it be the time in your life where you need to stop and take a look at your life and really think about, am I really treating my body the best I can. This is one body we get, looking at our nutrition, looking at our stress level, our sleep hygiene, our activity and exercise levels. There's so many things that I think as women, we do a really good job of caring for everybody else in our lives,
Yes.
not so much ourselves, right? We
Right.
don't put our self-care first. And I like to empower women in this time to really take this opportunity to make yourself be first in your life. Like, love yourself first, focus on your self-care, because that's really the way that you can optimize your wellness at midlife and after, really by
Yeah.
putting yourself first.
That's really so true. And of course, as women, we've spent most of our lives in busy jobs, taking care of families, and we've been kind of last on the list. And I think
Absolutely.
this is the best time of our life to really push ourselves to the top and realize this at this stage in the game, very often parents are getting older, we're having to do more for them. And how can we help them if we're not at our maximum
Right.
health, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It's like you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yes.
We can't help anybody else if we don't, fill our cup first, right? I think that's so very
Yeah.
important, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you advise women to up their self-care game, so to speak?
I think the biggest thing, and this is something that I still struggle with as an OBGYN, because I still work in a hospital and do overnight hospital shifts, but sleep. Sleep is one
Mm.
of the most underrated, undervalued luxuries in life that really can help us be our best selves. And I don't think that many people recognize or value how much restorative sleep can do for yourself and for your body and for your brain and your cognition and just your overall mental health and wellness too. I think that, so many of us are trying to fit so much in a day, and we're trying to do so many things that we often will cut out sleep as, we sacrifice that. But then we don't have the resilience and the
Mm.
tolerance that we need if we don't get good sleep. And so that's one of the biggest things I think is so important to try to. And that's one of the first things that women struggle with sometimes in
Yes.
menopause
Yes.
too. And so I think that's why it's of utmost importance, to really focus on. The other thing is nutrition. I think that, living in America, there are just so many bad things everywhere. And unfortunately, for our most vulnerable populations and the women that are exposed to bad socioeconomic situations, the best and easiest, cheapest food to get is always bad
Hmm.
for you. It's this
Hmm.
highly processed, junk, basically.
Yes.
And I really encourage patients to eat as many different colors of the rainbow that they can,
Yes.
to shop the periphery of grocery stores. All the things that can go bad are the things you want to focus on, like the fruits and vegetables, the meats, the dairy, and also just getting enough protein in the diet. I think that for me personally, when I started tracking and trying to see how much protein I needed, I was so under the target for so long until I really started paying attention to that. I don't think that a lot of women in midlife realize how much we lose our muscle mass and our strength and vitality as we age. And we have to be really, proactive in helping to keep our bodies strong so that we can stay fit, stay active, and not, really dwindle down in our strength and become those little
Mm.
weak, frail women, that we've
Right.
seen in
Yes.
older generations.
Yes. So protein is so important, and I'm a vegetarian, so it's something I always struggle with. Well, a pescatarian, I guess, because I do eat some fish. But I had not been doing too well before we went on vacation at the beginning of June. And because even though I know what to do, I don't always do it. So we actually cruised around the UK, which was wonderful for me. But I had, because the food was ready for me, I had enough protein 3 times a day. And the way that my body felt was so much better. And
Oh, wow.
also, just a PS on that, the food source in the UK, and I know throughout Europe, is so superior to ours because they got all these stringent testings and whatever it is they do with the food, you can tell the difference in the taste.
Oh yeah. Well, they
Yeah,
don't allow the genetically modified foods there,
right,
right? That's one of the
right.
biggest differences. Yeah.
And one thing that's funny to me is I have migraines, and we went to the UK. I had not one migraine the whole 3 weeks we were gone. But cheese is one of my triggers. And I was brought up in the in England, and cheese was one of my favorite foods, and so it's really bothered me. But we went to a cheese factory, and my husband said you can't have any cheese. Well, I tasted all of it. As I say, not one migraine when I was gone. So to me, it just spoke to me about how processed even things like our cheeses are.
Yes. Yeah. And if you eat more pure quality ingredients,
Yes,
how it doesn't affect our bodies negatively. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I agree. It's very hard for people to find these well-sourced foods because they've made them more expensive. Um, but I know that as far as fruit and vegetables go, if you can find a farmer's market or even a co-op,
Mhm.
or even if you're lucky enough to be able to grow your own vegetables and some fruits, that's really the best way to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's great. And
Mm.
that's really, that's really what I think if many people focused on getting the quality of their food improved and really, taking the time to plan and to really give yourself access to good, healthy foods so that you're not having to reach for something when you're over hungry or you're
Hmm.
exhausted. It makes such a difference. It really
Yeah,
does.
it
Yeah.
does. And how about exercise? Because I know it changes up in midlife or in menopause for women.
Yes. Yeah. I think one of the biggest fallacies a lot of women have is they're afraid of weight training and resistance training. I think so many women are afraid that if they start lifting weights, that they're going to bulk up or they're going to get big. And I don't think they realize how much work you actually have to put into trying to bulk up. But weight training and resistance training is so important for us to maintain our bone health, especially, and our, our posture and our strength. I think that's something that every woman should incorporate. And it doesn't mean you have to be that crazy gym goer. You don't have to have a membership where you go every day and have the perfect little gym outfit. This could be going outside and lifting bushels in your garden. It could be, carrying things around the house, just making sure that you're doing something that is lifting weights and resistance against your body. Walking is a fantastic exercise
Yes.
too. And I think that the other important thing, especially, is you have to find something that brings you joy that is like moving your body too, right? So, because if we dread doing it, there's going to be the days where you don't have the motivation, you don't want to do it. But if you're doing an activity that really sincerely makes you happy and brings you energy and joy, it's so much easier to incorporate it in your lifestyle. But it could be minor little changes like parking a little further away from the door at the grocery
Hmm.
store, walking a little bit more, taking the stairs at work instead of the elevator, incorporating these small movements of exercise, and little things like that in short bursts it makes a big difference compared to staying sedentary, and I think in
Yes.
America, there's so many people that, we drive everywhere, we're commuting in buses and trains and we're not walking as much, we're not as physically active. And so it's finding those small moments of movement in your everyday life, which can really make a big difference.
Yes, absolutely. Um, we had, as I said, just come back from vacation, and everywhere we went, we had to walk. And, I mean, it was just great. We thought that we wouldn't be up. There was one day when Google Maps got us lost. Uh, we we walked instead of 23 minutes. They actually were having a heat wave in Amsterdam, is where we finished up, and we walked for 2 hours.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I'm like, oh, I know we're not going to make this. Neither of us are used to 2 hour walks, but we both just did great. And so I think sometimes we've got lower expectations of ourselves than what we can actually achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so true. And especially like when you're on vacation, you're not really paying attention to like a hard schedule or a time limit.
Mm.
And so it's easier to extend yourself a little bit more as you're exploring.
And what are some of the things? Because I know that one of the symptoms that women have in menopause is anxiety, and I think it surprises people because they're not expecting that. How
Yes.
do you help them to manage anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of different ways to treat anxiety, but understanding why it is that we start to develop these symptoms is important too, because I don't think many women realize, we think about our hormones really being related to our, GYN system and
Mm,
our ovaries and fertility and reproduction and our periods, but estrogen is integral in our brain for the formulation of like our serotonin and our other
mm,
neurotransmitters. And when we have a decrease over time, like we see in midlife, we start to see changes in our mental health and our wellness, and women get prone to anxiety or depression because of that loss of estrogen.
mm,
And so we need to be a little bit
mm,
more proactive in really, making sure that, we get enough rest, that we're eating well. And if you choose to do hormone replacement therapy, it's a great option to help with that, to help combat that. But sometimes that alone is not always right, and it's not right for every patient, and so everyone's different. So you have to find other ways, and for me, I think a big part of my own mental health and awareness and wellness is getting outside and
mm,
getting exposure to sunlight and vitamin D. But the same thing, like bringing moments of pleasure and joy back into your life is so very important. Finding ways to combat, negative thoughts or anxiety, and finding ways to do things behaviorally that can help to combat that. And if that's, taking 30 minutes a day for your wellness to do meditation or do yoga or just do something that brings you joy and happiness, then that's something you have to try to incorporate actively so that you have that every day.
mm,
But I think that we need to be open to therapy and, cognitive behavioral therapy, especially. There's been such a stigma, like a negative
mm.
impression toward anybody getting therapy. But I think we need to change that. It should be a part of like regular medical care for everybody. I really believe that,
Yeah,
and
that
so
would be great if our insurance companies could just get up to date with that.
yes, yes, I wish they would for sure.
Yeah, because it always helps to talk to somebody, and unless you've got a really close, trusted friend or your spouse that you can, and how many times can you just lay it on them that this is what's going on? Yeah, having an independent source to bounce things off of is really very helpful, and we'll often tell them
Absolutely.
things that we wouldn't tell other people.
Absolutely. And the thing is that our thoughts and some of the anxiety, it's something that develops as a self-protection mechanism, but sometimes our thoughts are not always serving us well. And you
Mm,
don't have to believe everything that you think, right?
right,
And
right.
sometimes, getting out of those negative thought patterns and really helping to combat anxiety is to challenge those inner deepest thoughts that we have that may not serve us well anymore, and so
Mm,
that's something that a therapist could really help with.
mm. Yeah, I agree. And just one last question. I want to know because I read that you do a plant-based hormone replacement therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. So traditionally, a lot of the HRT that was available for years was all, made with big pharma, and a lot of
Mm,
the early HRTs were actually derived from animal-based hormones. Specifically, the oldest HRT that's been around is a medication called Premarin, which
yeah.
actually was derived, the word Premarin comes from pregnant mare's urine, which is how they initially isolated the hormones they were using in that medication. So we use plant-based sources, but we use all bioidentical hormones, right? So as human female beings, we have three main estrogens in our body. We have estradiol, we have estriol, and estrone. And so if you're using any other form of estrogen that's not one of those, it's not what your body is naturally used to dealing with. And progesterone is the other hormone to balance our estrogens. And so a lot of the hormone replacement therapies have synthetic versions of these hormones. And so you'll see variations of that name, like, in birth controls and other pills, they'll say ethinyl estradiol. Well, it's an isomer, if you remember from like high school
Mm,
chemistry. So the molecular structure of those medications is not the same as what your body would make naturally. So what we find is that with bioidentical hormones being identical to what your body was creating on its own when it was making enough, you tend to be able to use lower doses. Your body incorporates them much easier because they're chemical compounds that your body was already making that it's familiar with. And so it's much better tolerated with less side effects, compared to the synthetic hormones. So a lot of our early hormones were, derived from yams. Then there was a
Mm.
yam shortage, and so we had to get creative. And so I think, what a lot of women don't realize is a lot of root vegetables actually have a lot of natural soy isoflavones and phytoestrogens in them that have the same chemical compound that what our body is making on its own. And so
Mm.
that's another way that women can kind of help to treat themselves naturally is to by incorporating some of those, healthier root vegetables that have these compounds naturally into their diet more. And they're also great, for the brain and for, brain health and wellness too. So it's all about incorporating more different colors and more vegetables and things into the body. But that's really when we say plant-based, all of the hormones that we're using in our medications are all derived from plant sources.
Mm. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So, if you had one tip that you could leave with women to get them started on a better journey during their midlife years, what would it be?
Learn as much as you can about your body and about what's happening physiologically, and really knowledge is power, right? So take control of your own health. Make sure that you're logging your symptoms, you're learning as much as you can about what to anticipate when, and to know where you have access to care, and how to navigate to get the help that you need. I think that that's so powerful to just
Mm.
really take the reins and take control of your own health. That's my
Mm.
advice to all patients out there.
Yeah,
It can really make a difference.
thanks. Where is the best place for people to find you?
Sure, sure. So on Instagram, you can find me. My handle on there is Dr. Cat OBGYN. You can find us, through the Winona page as well, which is winona.com. But there's also, I think I have a Facebook page now and TikTok. We're trying to use all these different venues to help get the education out. And some of those sources in social media are really a lot of younger patients, but you'd be amazed. Like, I think that, if we even teach women in their 20s and
Mm.
30s more about what to expect with perimenopause, they're going to have such an advantage over what we
Yes,
did when we get
yes.
to that point, because you really have to be aware that things happen much earlier than, your 50s. I think many of us thought we were going to be fine until we turned
Yeah,
50. But the transition starts so much earlier, and we
yes.
spend most of our lives postmenopausal. So it's important to learn what's going to happen in your body and all these changes that are going to occur so that you can navigate them the best that you can, make your
Yeah.
life the best it can be.
Mm. That's so absolutely true. So thank you so much for joining us today and all of this information. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think, it's great to get the information out there.
Mhm.
And as many of your listeners listening, hopefully they'll talk to a friend and get the conversation rolling so that women are talking about this and helping
Right.
each other through this time.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.